So actually, it's a little surprising. So one of the resources that I use in the classes is Project Drawdown, which is an analysis of what it would take to draw down global greenhouse gas emissions to a reasonable level. And when they ranked the things to get us down to a 2 degree, to limit us at a 2 degree Celsius temperature rise, they came to the conclusion that the number one and two things we could do both involved food systems. The first one I think is a surprise to people, and that is waste less food. That's the number one thing. And by the way, that's bigger than all the wind turbines that we would likely put in, all the solar panels we'd likely put in. It varies across the planet what that means. So in the United States, it's principally at the consumer level or near the consumer level. So it's the food that we buy that we don't eat and throw away. It's the food that we get at restaurants that we leave on our plate. It's the food that we get at supermarkets that go bad before we get to use it, or the really don't go bad, but the best by dates expire. So that's actually the number one thing. Number two would be, and which Project Drawdown lists as number two, is, and again, bigger than all the wind turbines and solar installations, would be to shift to a largely plant-based diet. It doesn't necessarily have to be entirely plant-based in the sense of vegan, but mostly plant-based, and certainly taking out of the equation things like beef and lamb. Yeah. Um, Climatarian is a word that, if I'm not mistaken, came into use around 2015. Never really caught on, and there's another type of diet called flexitarian, which you may hear more about. But a climatarian diet, in the simplest form, is just to be aware of the climate impact of everything that you eat. It can be very tricky, as I've mentioned in classes, because something like asparagus is a terrific option, but depends on where it comes from. So in California, if you get asparagus in the winter, sometimes it'll have a carbon footprint equal to chicken because it is literally flown in from someplace like South America. But if it's grown locally, and we do grow it locally in California, it's fine. It's a kind of mindfulness. The way I think of it is certainly awareness to think about, what you're doing, and we just don't generally think about that. I think arguably we've learned during the 20th century to think about it, what we eat in terms of how it impacts our bodies and nutrition and all, but we just don't think about it in terms of the planet. A climatarian thinks about it for the good of the planet, not just the good of our bodies.
You can visit our very own local food co-op in Isla Vista to practice the Climatarian diet. First, you can purchase mostly plant-based items to reduce your intake of red meat. Luckily, the co-op has a variety of plant-based alternatives. Second, you can eat local. Being a locavore means you eat locally whenever possible, and the food co-op has several resources that make this diet easily accessible. The co-op is a responsible way to grocery shop because the produce comes from our local farmers and producers, which assures that what you're buying has less transportation costs. Also, the food co-op has many options for organic produce, which helps to avoid water eutrophication and promote soil health. At the food co-op, you can make other conscious decisions, such as picking foods that are not packaged or processed. Lastly, the co-op has food scrap drop-off bins to compost your leftover waste, which brings us to another aspect of the climatarian diet: composting.
Not all food can be saved from becoming food waste. Even if you take only what you need, some food scraps like peels, shells, and coffee grounds will be left behind. And when this organic waste is thrown away, it ends up in the landfill. But with composting and growing your own food, you can create a closed-loop food system.
I think of it as just a big circle, a nice cycle of how we eat, and instead of just kind of getting rid of our waste, putting it in the landfill, we use it to compost. So any little leftovers that you may have from your meals, most of them can be used to generate nutrition for the soil and then used to produce new crops, new plants, new food. Really beautiful system that kind of ties up all those loose ends of our food system.
In summation, transferring to a climatarian diet that is focused on eating plant-based, local, organic, wasting less food, and composting is essential to reducing carbon emissions. You can start reducing your carbon footprint today by just taking red meat off your plate.